All right, hello. Hope everybody's feeling rested after the break. I have the challenge and the pleasure of spending the next 5 to 7 minutes to explain what we named the SAGE model. Now, this, if you're familiar with GIS, this is a basic suitability analysis. And I do emphasize the word basic because we need to keep modeling fairly simple. So this is what I like to call common sense modeling. Keeping it simple is primary. So a model is a representation of reality, just like a map. SAGE was designed to prioritize grassland attributes on O&M acreages on rows. The idea there being we didn't want to displace the entire model across a network because that would skew our results. We just wanted to focus on areas of active management. If we are to transition a utility from structurally oriented to ecologically oriented IVM, then we need a place to start. And the question is, how can we prioritize areas for a phased approach? I believe we can use a model similar to this, but we need to be aware of the restrictions. Restrictions around modeling. You want to keep it simple, but it needs to be complex enough to produce robust results. The unfortunate part about open source data and maintaining efficiency is that there's a lot of open source data out there, but not a whole lot of it is particularly useful, particularly when you look at resolution. If you want to resolve a model to a 30-foot or 50-foot right-of-way, you can't exactly bring in 30-meter pixels. The National Land Cover data set is fairly restrictive when it comes to being precise. So why grasslands? This is basically our decision context. We have system resources. These define competitive environments: full sun, deep, well-drained soils, non-hydric, and suitable topography. Basically, ideal conditions for plant growth. IVM, how do we want to manage? Do we want to manage with ecological principles, or do we want to manage structurally? Structurally being more a reliance on broadcast spraying and mowing. Vegetation structure and composition. Are we managing for compatibles, or are we selecting against incompatibles only? And insect pollinator habitat. This is what we want, right? Forage and nesting habitat for insect pollinators. Finally, IVM maintenance. And this is meant to be in the long term. That really should say long-term IVM maintenance. And this relates to intensity and frequency of treatment. So here we have two options. We have the ecological approach, ecologically oriented IVM, and that is the selective treatment shown in red. And that shows that ecologically oriented IVM can lead to compatible plant community structure because that's what we're planning for, which gives us forage and nesting, which in the long run leads to low intensity and low frequency of IVM maintenance. Conversely, you have structural. This would be a reliance on mowing and spraying, leading to both compatible and incompatible structures. Although I would emphasize here that, and I get this argument a lot, is that we can mow and we can spray and we can produce pollinator habitat. That is true, but we can't do it everywhere. That's the blind squirrel line leading from structural to compatible, in that every now and then a blind squirrel finds a nut, but we're not planning for it. And of course we can get forage and nesting, but in the long run, unfortunately, the studies are showing that IVM intensity and frequency under structurally oriented IVM is leading to high intensity, high frequency treatments. So here's the conceptual framework for SAGE, the Suitability Analysis for Grassland Ecosystems. And I'm not going to overwhelm you with the procedural framework. This is a simplification. This is just a concept. On the left-hand side, and we're going to read this from left to right, I started with the rights-of-way. These are the O&M acreages. A verified locational accuracy, that's I found can be quite a challenge. Some of us know where our lines are. Some of us might have a general idea of where our lines are. There you want to select for full sun and partially shaded sites. That gets back to competitive habitats, and that gives us our management units. Then we have public conservation lands and private conservation lands. This is partnership. We can combine these. This is national, tribal, state, municipal lands. as well as private conservation lands, like folks like the TNC. Then we have soils, deep, well-drained, non-hydric, touched on that earlier. There are a variety of places where this data is available, mostly through the NRCS, the Surgo system, but weeding through those databases can be a little bit complicated. Once you get the hang of it, you're good to go. And then finally, digital terrain models, DTMs. Some of you might know these as DEMs, or digital elevation models. This is what gives us our suitable aspects and slopes. Basically, what we're capturing here are our operational restrictions. We want to be able to operate with ease on lower sloping lands, but we also want to capture solar insolation because, as we know, plants are not limited by atmospheric carbon dioxide, but they might be limited by light. So we want to capture southern exposures. So what we're doing is setting up all of the conditions that we need to manage for and maintain a grassland in the long run. For this particular model, down at the bottom, I excluded fully forested rows. That is not to say that IVM or intensive IVM, ecologically oriented IVM, whatever you want to call it, is not appropriate for fully forested areas, but I excluded them for the model because I was looking for a way to prioritize intensive IVM on large systems. So this model was created, on the backs of giants. This was basically done through an extensive literature review and then many, many hours playing with the data. It went through a sensitivity analysis, further refinement into a second iteration, and that's the QA/QC. But in that this model was built basically on other people's ideas, it's not proprietary. And I certainly do welcome other people's comments, other people's inputs. If you want to put your heads together and basically increase or strengthen the models, then let's do that. Come and find me. That's it.